When the first European ship arrived at Easter Island in 1722, the sailors found something they couldn't explain. Lining the coast of this tiny volcanic island, one of the most remote inhabited places on Earth, and 3,700 kilometers from the nearest continent, were hundreds of giant stone statues. Some of them 10 meters tall, and almost no one left who could explain how they got there. For 3 centuries, the world has been trying to answer that question. The answer, it turns out, changes everything else we thought we knew about this place. The Rapa Nui arrived on the island around 1200 AD. Polynesian sailors who had crossed thousands of kilometers of open ocean using only the stars and the flight paths of birds to navigate. When they landed, the island was covered in dense palm forest. The ocean around them was full of fish. Easter Island was the last uninhabited place on Earth. Their arrival completed a journey that had taken humanity out of Africa, across Asia, and across the entire Pacific. There was nowhere left to go. Within a few generations, they had built one of the most unusual visual cultures in human history.
Islanders sail out on canoes to greet the explorers.
The captain writes about these people in his logs. He writes that they're built very strong, they're very friendly, they have astonishingly white teeth, they've got these very unique hairstyles. Now, the captain, he starts to realize this island is unlike anything that he's ever encountered before.
The statues, the moai, were carved from the soft volcanic rock of a single quarry on the island's eastern edge. Nearly 900 of them. Some teams worked for over a year to carve a single figure. The completed ones were moved to stone platforms around the coast, where they stood with their backs to the sea, watching over the living. The question that obsessed every European visitor for 3 centuries was simple. How did they move them? For a long time, the working theory was logs. The islanders must have cut down trees to use as rollers, hauling the statues across the island on wooden sleds. It was a plausible explanation that had one convenient side effect. It explained the deforestation. When researchers asked the islanders' descendants how their ancestors had moved the statues, the answer was always the same. They walked. Europeans dismissed this as folklore. It took until 2025 for the science to catch up. Researchers studying the statues abandoned along the island's roads noticed something. The ones left on uphill paths had fallen backward. The ones on downhill paths had fallen forward. The pattern pointed to one conclusion. The statues were moving upright, rocking from side to side in a slow zigzag motion guided by ropes. When archaeologists tested this with a 4-ton replica, 18 people moved it 100 meters in 40 minutes.
The difference between the road statues and the Ahu statues is night and day. When you look at just the road statues, you see that they're shaped in a way that doesn't allow them to stand up. They carefully constructed these statues, and you have to get all the details right. The center of gravity, the basal part, the angle of its form were all vital in terms of allowing it to move. It's that falling point that actually makes it possible for the statue to move. It puts it in a dynamic position so that all you need to do is add the rocking part and it starts to walk.
The islanders had been telling the truth all along. And if the statues walked rather than rolled on logs, the deforestation had nothing to do with moving them. The entire narrative built around the moai, the obsession, the greed, the ecological suicide, starts to unravel. The forest did disappear. That part is not in dispute. When the first settlers arrived, the island was covered in millions of palm trees. By the time Europeans came, it was almost bare. The question is why? Some of it was farming. The Rapa Nui cleared land for crops, the same way farming communities have done everywhere in the world. That is not a mystery or a moral failing. It is agriculture. But the larger factor appears to have been something that arrived with the settlers without anyone intending it: the Polynesian rat. Stowaways in the canoes, they found themselves on an island with millions of palm trees and no natural predators. They multiplied rapidly and ate the seeds before the forest could regenerate. Studies of the earliest soil layers on the island found palm nut shells with rat tooth marks going back to the first years of human settlement. The forest didn't disappear because the Rapa Nui were reckless. It disappeared because a small animal ate its future while the people were still building their civilization. And when it was gone, the Rapa Nui adapted. They developed rock mulching, laying stones across the soil to trap moisture and concentrate nutrients, eventually covering half the island's surface in these gardens. They cultivated crops in underground volcanic caves. Studies show those rock gardens are still functioning as designed today, with nutrient levels 2 to 3 times higher inside than outside. When the first Europeans arrived, they were not greeted by a people on the edge of starvation. They were offered chickens and bananas. The sailors, malnourished after weeks at sea, were the hungry ones. For centuries before Europeans arrived, the population of Rapa Nui had been growing. The island was not in collapse. The people were not starving. A 2024 study analyzing ancient DNA from historical Rapa Nui individuals found no genetic evidence of any population crash before the 1860s. What came after European contact was a different story. Disease arrived with the first ships, smallpox and syphilis among others, to which the islanders had no immunity. The population began to fall. Then, in the 1860s, Peruvian slave raiders arrived in organized expeditions, armed and prepared, and took over 1,000 people from the island, roughly a third of those who remained, to work on plantations in South America. When international pressure eventually forced their return, fewer than 100 survived the voyage back. Those who made it home carried smallpox. It spread through the remaining population. By 1877, the number of Rapa Nui people left on the island was 111. The statues had already been toppled by then, not as a sign of collapse from within, but by a people who had watched their world dissolve and lost faith in ancestors who could not protect them from what kept arriving across the water. The story most people carry about Easter Island is one of self-destruction. A civilization so obsessed with its statues that it cut down every tree, collapsed into famine and war, and left those monuments as an accidental warning to the future. What the science describes is something different. A people who lost their forest and rebuilt their land, who fed themselves from stone gardens and volcanic caves, who walked hundreds of statues into place with ropes and 18 people, and who were eventually brought to the edge of extinction, not by anything they did to their island, but by what kept arriving from the sea. The statues are still there, most of them face down in the grass where they fell. What they're actually commemorating is still being worked out. The Rapa Nui are still on the island too. Their language, their music, their connection to the Moai, none of it disappeared completely.